Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm that newsman, Sam Sachs. It's the Friday show, and it's been a long week. So tell the boss that I said you can have the rest of the day off. President Biden was late to his State of the Union address on Thursday night. The Secret Service had to come up with an alternative route to get the president to the Capitol, since hundreds of protesters blocked Pennsylvania Avenue, demanding an end to the genocide in Gaza and a lasting ceasefire. Biden's going to be reminded of his involvement in this catastrophe everywhere he goes. Hours before the address, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected calls from the U.S. and around the world to hold off on an invasion of Rafah, currently home to more than 1 million Palestinian war refugees. In a speech to military officers, Netanyahu said, quote, "Whoever tells us not to act in Rafah is telling us to lose the war, and that will not happen." The Biden administration has warned Israel not to assault Rafah without a credible plan to protect civilians, and congressional Democrats have said that any such invasion would necessitate the cutting off of U.S. weapons to Israel. But in his State of the Union address on Thursday night, Biden announced no such plans to restrict arms flowing to the Israeli military and no new steps to pressure the government to respect international humanitarian law. No, none of that. Instead, he proposed some whacked-out idea about sending the U.S. military into Gaza to build a giant port. What?
Tonight, I'm directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters. No U.S. boots will be on the ground. A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day.
All right, let me get this straight. We're going to send troops to Gaza to construct some kind of port. How the hell is that going to work exactly? Sky News reporter pressed the administration for more details, but was told that any dates, timelines, etc. are all things that are still being worked out. No kidding. Look, if you actually think this port or whatever it is going to be built, then I have a pouch of magic beans to sell you. This is a ruse to distract from the fact that the Israelis continue to commit war crimes with U.S. weapons and funding, and Biden doesn't have the spine to actually punish it by cutting off aid or imposing sanctions on the government. Senator Bernie Sanders responded to the port idea by welcoming news of expanded humanitarian aid going into Gaza, but as he noted, quote, "Let's be clear about why this extraordinary step is necessary. Despite months of increasingly urgent requests from the very highest officials in the U.S. government, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his extreme right-wing government have refused to let in sufficient humanitarian aid. That has led to this incredible situation in which a U.S. ally is using U.S. weapons and equipment to block the delivery of U.S. humanitarian aid." Sanders added, quote, "The United States provides Israel with $3.8 billion in military aid every year, and Congress is considering another $14 billion this year. It's time we stop asking Israel to do the right thing and start telling Israel what must happen if they want the support of the United States." Majorities of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans want the U.S. to stop supporting this genocide and to work toward a lasting ceasefire. The longer the Biden administration resists that, the more likely it will cost them in November. The one thing the White House does have going for it, though, on this issue is that its opponents on the right are even more depraved and willing to support Israel's slaughter of Palestinians. Earlier this week, Donald Trump said he wants Israel to, quote, "finish the problem in Gaza," an endorsement of the ongoing military campaign. And during the Republican response to the State of the Union, delivered by Congresswoman Katie Britt from Alabama, the suffering of Palestinians wasn't even mentioned. It was completely ignored. Instead, the focus was on stuff like this.
The Chinese Communist Party is undercutting America's workers. China is buying up our farmland, spying on our military installations, and spreading propaganda through the likes of TikTok. You see, the CCP knows that if it conquers the minds of our next generation, it conquers America.
Why is she talking like that? I love how there's never been a single normal Republican response to the State of the Union. Then again, how could there be? The party is full of freaking weirdos. Anyway, Biden versus Trump. Choice between tepid or enthusiastic support for genocide in Gaza. The Securities and Exchange Commission finalized a new rule that requires publicly traded companies to disclose information about their role in fueling global warming. The new reporting requirement will give investors insights into how climate change is affecting operations at various businesses. Corporate interests have spent years trying to kill this new rule and did succeed in watering it down before it was finalized. Under the rule, companies will have to disclose how climate change is affecting their operations, how vulnerable they are to certain climate change-fueled weather events like floods and wildfires, and how much the firm is investing in mitigating those risks. Larger companies will also have to disclose carbon emissions generated by their operations and energy usage, which are known as Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. However, here the rule was weakened substantially due to industry pressure. Smaller companies were exempted from such reporting, and larger companies only need to report emissions if they are deemed to be significant enough to influence an investor. The final rule also dropped reporting requirements on what are known as Scope 3 emissions, which is any pollution caused by a company's supply chains. And that's kind of a big deal. The Washington Post cited data from the UN that found as much as 75% of overall emissions could be unaccounted for by not including supply chain pollution. Because of that, a lot of climate activists and lawmakers were upset by the new, weakened rule. Senator Ed Markey said, quote, "Climate risks are financial risks. The SEC decision will let big corporations off the hook by not requiring disclosure of emissions throughout their supply chains. That means big promises with little accountability to deliver emissions reductions. Unacceptable." So the senator's mad, but not nearly as mad as polluting industries and their paid-off politicians who are upset that they have to report anything at all related to climate change. The Attorney General in West Virginia immediately announced a lawsuit to block the rule, signed on to by 10 other states. They're challenging the SEC's authority to even craft such a rule. Conservatives have found success using the right-wing judiciary to void federal rulemaking, particularly when it comes to climate change. Now, the idea behind this new regulation is that investors, armed with more knowledge about how companies are operating amid climate change, will then direct their money toward firms that are acting most responsibly and are better positioned to literally weather the storms. In other words, it's another one of those free market solutions to climate change, which have so far proven to be insufficient to address a problem that requires heavy-handed state action, like seizing oil fields, shutting down major polluters, and investing huge amounts of money into revolutionizing how energy is produced and consumed. And yet, even the market-friendly reforms have the industry raging mad. These guys don't realize how good they have it right now. The SEC is being a lot more reasonable than the masses with pitchforks will be as the planet descends into climate chaos. All right, now that I have your attention, we're actually not talking about weed. We're talking about LSD. We just don't have an LSD bumper yet. The Food and Drug Administration, for the first time, granted breakthrough status to an LSD-based treatment. Therapy was developed by a company called Mind Medicine, and it's been shown in early tests to be very effective including relieving general anxiety disorder after just one dose. The FDA's designation fast-tracks the therapy, but it still needs to undergo more clinical trials before final approval. According to MindMed, the LSD-based treatment was, quote, generally well tolerated with only mild to moderate transient side effects, the most common being illusions, hallucinations, euphoric mood, abnormal thinking. Wait, these aren't side effects. These are just reasons to take the drug. MindMed stock jumped 24% on the FDA's announcement, as did several other companies that are producing LSD-based treatments. Unlike the old heads who already knew the medicinal benefits of acid and got thrown in prison for it, this new wave of LSD pioneers are going to get rich as hell. Somewhere Tim Leary is saying, fucking told you so. One last bit of business to take care of before the weekend. Let's check out those rich dick nominations on social media. The always reliable Arona is in there nominating all the goddamn landlords. What can I say? Their hatred is pure, and it's admirable. Got a nomination here for Mexican oligarch Carlos Slim, one of the richest people in the world. He's nominated for his ownership in the New York Times, a newspaper that is torching its already sunken reputation by advancing totally depraved Israeli war propaganda. We're putting some of the blame for that on you this week, Carlos. The Wolf nominated Kirsten Sinema, who is definitely about to cash out and become a rich dick lobbyist. And when she does, we'll revisit this nomination. And finally, here's a nomination for Joe Manchin. This stems from that incident at Harvard last week in which one of Manchin's goons assaulted a climate activist. At one point, it looked like Manchin himself was going to throw a punch. What can I say? He's a Maserati driving, yacht sailing, coal slinging asshole. Thanks for all the nominations online, but in the end, this week's rich dick is Bob Frenzel. Bob is the CEO of Xcel Energy, which admitted this week it may have played a role in sparking the biggest Texas wildfire in history. Investigators from Texas A&M University concluded that the Smokehouse Creek fire, which burned more than 1 million acres, was likely caused by downed power lines operated by Xcel. The company said in response that it's cooperating with investigators, that it didn't act negligently, but that, quote, based on currently available information, Xcel Energy acknowledges that its facilities appear to have been involved in an ignition of the Smokehouse Creek fire. Hey, at least the company is admitting it this time. Xcel is a Minnesota-based energy firm with operations in several states, where it also appears to be trying to set wildfire records. Last year, the company's power lines were found to be the cause of a massive inferno in Colorado, known as the Marshall Fire, the largest one in that state's history, too. In that case, Bob Frenzel denied his company had anything to do with it. However, a flurry of lawsuits filed against Xcel, citing the results of the wildfire investigation, alleged the company was negligent in starting the blaze, that it knew its equipment was vulnerable, but didn't invest in the necessary upgrades and maintenance. One complaint read, quote, the inherent danger in electricity and Xcel Energy's design of its electrical equipment materialized in an arcing event that was a substantial factor in causing and contributing to the spread of the Marshall Fire. That fire destroyed 1,000 homes and caused $2 billion in damages. And a year before it, when Xcel should have been investing in safer equipment in places like Colorado, now Texas, the company instead paid Bob Frenzel more than $7 million in executive compensation. And I wish that this was an isolated thing, and that we could just shit on old Bob and move on. Problem is, it's not. Utility companies across the West are sparking these massive wildfires. They have poorly maintained, aging equipment that is being forced to operate in hotter, drier, and windier conditions. And the companies don't want to cut into their profits to fix it. Whether it's PG&E, which had its equipment responsible for the 2020 wildfires in California that affected tens of thousands of people and killed 4, or Hawaiian Electric's infrastructure, which failed and sparked one of the deadliest wildfires in U.S. history, wiping out the city of Lahaina on the island of Maui. So Bob Frenzel represents not only himself, but all destructive utility CEOs who are quite literally playing with fire and are proving that the profit motive can't be trusted to safely deliver electricity. They are this week's Rich Dicks. All right, friends, the show ends with a sunrise from Pennsylvania. It was sent in by Bry in Philly. Enjoy. Thank you, Bry. Show's over. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up for Means TV if you haven't yet, and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and follow us on social media. One day capitalism will fall. Till then, we're going to be right here. See you next week.